All right. So now that we've covered the three parts of rhetoric, some of the particulars related to persuasive talks, such as how to use visuals and not to use activities and not to have objectives overtly stated in your talk, we're going to talk about putting together the pieces. So there's a couple elements that you can think through. These are maybe not step by step, but things for you to think about as you're crafting your speech. So establish what you want to convince your audience to believe or do. And sometimes it helps to write it out, like to force you to, put it into actual words, because you may have like a nebulous sort of feeling in your head about what you want them to accomplish. But if you write it out, I think it'll really sort of crystallize it for you. So maybe it's like, doing no-till farming, or maybe it's, supporting having horse slaughter facilities in the U.S. or, something that hopefully you feel about passionately. And the next thing to do is to figure out how you can hook them. Like, what is going to be the most interesting thing, and then sort of lead with that. Sometimes people will have a vested interest in it automatically. Other times you're going to have to work a little bit harder to show how the thing that you're passionate about is related to the person. So whatever that is, you just need to. But what people always do wrong is they always start with like a chronological order, or they start with the way that like they feel like the thing that they're most interested in. And if you've learned anything from this class, it's that if you can get past what you have in your head that you want to get out of this, like out into the world, and think instead about what the audience needs to get into their heads and like where they're at and what they need to understand, you'll be in like loads better shape. So figure out what your listeners' major issues will be with the topics and address them with recommendations. So a couple things. If you're delivering a talk that is known to be controversial, which is usually the way that these persuasive speeches go, and that's fine, you know that there are some counter arguments against it, okay? Against whatever it is that you're pushing. And so because your audience can't argue with you, sometimes they'll just shut down if you sort of gloss over the things that they know are known issues with your talk. And so it's good to address them, like to go ahead and take counter whatever the issues, like known issues are, on your own terms, And so if there are sort of like, 2 or 3 known things that people don't like about GMOs, and so maybe it's control of the seeds by like 1 or 2 major companies, or maybe it is the effect of monocropping on ecological systems, or what. Like, go ahead and address those in your talks, that the person that's listening that's skeptical can be like, oh, this guy's talking about one of the things that I knew about, and that way it makes you seem more credible too, because you're not just like painting a rosy picture, but you're addressing things that people are concerned about. So it's good to show the benefits early on. If you got something that you're selling, put why it's good right up front. Like, don't bury the most important thing. Provide evidence, reason, options, and features, especially if you're selling something like in particular. What are the things? And then finally at the end, like kind of, bring it to a close, have like a review, you don't necessarily have to be quite as scripted as like, all right, today we talked about these 4 things and I have a dream speech. But, sort of summarize this at the end, like give us a moment where we know that we are coming to the end, and then provide, like, hit us with the call to the action. So like now that you sort of laid out your argument and sort of summarized it at the end, like, what do you want us to do? So again, like, persuasion is a way of thinking. So figure out what your audience wants, appeal to their concerns, stress benefits, provide evidence, and call them to action. That was my review thing. So now we'll talk about fielding questions. Sorry, I sound terrible. So fielding questions, and again, like, this is something that you probably could have had all along, but we really wanted you to focus on, getting your speeches right. Now, hopefully you feel a little bit better about speaking in front of the group, and we can move on to some of the more like better stuff. So we have for you, because everything has to be an acronym, the ALRAM method. I wish it were alarm. That would be so much better. So first step in preparing questions from the audience is to anticipate and prepare, right? That's where the A comes from, right? So maybe you practice with your roommates, or maybe you run your talk by some friends that you have, and if they ask you questions, you're like, oh, okay, like I'll probably get these questions in class too. Or maybe you just know from knowing a lot about your topic that some of the things that people seem to be concerned about are X, Y, and Z. So go ahead and prepare for those, because fielding questions is the thing that adds to your credibility, and the better experience for the audience. The next step is, once people ask the question, listen both physically and mentally, right? And by, mentally is pretty easy. So obviously you have to process the words that are traveling through the air. But when we say physically, we mean listen, or with your body language, you need to convey to the person that you're listening to their question and you care about what it is that they're trying to say. So that's, looking at them directly, squaring your body with them. Sometimes what people do when they don't want to hear the question is they'll look away, or they'll sort of turn their shoulder towards the person. And it just sort of gives the appeal, gives the impression that you don't want to hear what they have to say. And you should, if you know what you're looking for and you watch press conferences, it's a lot of fun, because people, they ring and they twist when they get questions that they don't want to hear. But anyway, so that's what I mean by physically and mentally. So repeat or rephrase the question, right? So sometimes people just didn't hear it, so you just need to repeat it. And then sometimes the question that they asked was just really muddled. They may not have had it formed real well because they were talking on the fly. And so you can rephrase it into something that is a little bit more easy to answer and a little bit more understandable for the audience. Try to answer the question concisely. So just don't ramble, just, give an answer and then come to the end, and then move on to the next question. You don't necessarily have to linger. You don't have to go back to that person. There's generally more people in the room with other questions, and people understand that sometimes you got to move on and try to hear about other people. So, all right. So when should you ask some questions to the audience? Generally at the end, right? In this persuasive talks, we talked a lot about rhetorical questions that you can pose that you don't really expect an answer for. And those are things that you can pepper throughout. In the persuasive talks, you generally hold your questions for the end. Excuse me. It is okay to say, I don't know. It's certainly better to say, I don't know, than to try to make something up, right? Because that ruins your credibility. And that's the thing that we learned that is a necessity for trying to convince people to come around to your way of thinking. What if the answer, if somebody interrupts you and in your talk, and they ask you a question that will come later in your presentation? If it's right away, if it's right around the corner, you say, oh, what a great segue. And we're gonna talk about this, the thing that you asked a question about. If they do pose a question and it comes later, you can't actually just say, I'm actually going to address that in just a few minutes and I'll come back to you. And maybe at the end you ask them, did I answer your question? So how do you cut off questions? It's real simple. You just say, all right, that's time, especially in class. In class, somebody will actually do that for you. But if you are, out there in the real world, you may just say, we have to move on to the next thing, or somebody else, needs to speak, or, some polite way to show that we're wrapping up and need to move on. So what if the question doesn't pertain to everyone? This is the really specific question asker. And there's always one, right? Oh gosh, I have, maybe you're giving a talk on gardening and this person's like, well, I grow this particular variety of carrots in Southwest Missouri and I can't get how much water do I need, and you're like, why would you ever tie up everybody's day with your ridiculous carrot question? But people do that, and it's real annoying. And so one tip may just be to ask them to see you sort of afterward, and you'll be glad to answer their question because it's really specific. All right. So as a review, sorry. Okay, I'm better now. What are the major differences between informational and persuasive? Again, a persuasive includes a call to action. It features rhetoric, so ethos, pathos, logos. So you're trying to make a logical, rational argument. You're trying to establish your credibility. You're also trying to make an emotional argument. None of these things you do in an informational talk. You can use rhetorical questions. You don't use activities in a persuasive talk. You use visuals in a much more minimal way. Because again, idea isn't to, deliver a ton of information, in which case it is good to have it on the screen. Sorry, I'm having like a coughing fit. It's to bring people around to your way of thinking. And so you need to think about like, what's the minimal amount of information that I need to put on the screen to, sort of emphasize my main points. But the main part of the talk is on you and your voice. What's the purpose of the call to action? It's meant to get somebody to do a thing, right? So maybe it's purchasing. Maybe it's taking some kind of political action. Maybe it's writing letters. Maybe it's, whatever. But you do need to make it specific and achievable, and you only get one call, and do it with confidence. What are the three aspects of rhetoric? Again, logos, pathos, and ethos, so credibility. And it takes all three of these things to really make a strong rhetorical argument. And then what are some tips for doing Q&A? The OWL-RAM method. So good. Cool. Thank you. I'm going to go take some NyQuil.